Good evening. I'm Charlene Leo, the Associate Head of the Department of Art and Associate Professor in Printmaking, which you can guess my excitement that Enrique Chagoya is here with us tonight. It's really wonderful to see such a packed house of students, faculty, and community here at our Department of Art Visiting Lecture Series. And it is my very sincere honor to introduce Enrique Chagoya, our guest speaker for the evening. And as I've mentioned already, I love his work, and I'm constantly citing it during my class discussions and lectures. And I'm also incredibly excited that we have an exhibition at the museum at the same time. I'm going to briefly mention some biographical and professional highlights, of which I'll confess was really difficult to condense between a compelling biography and a long list of accomplishments. Enrique Chagoya was born and raised in Mexico City and holds dual citizenship, becoming a U.S. citizen in 2000. As a young adult, Chagoya studied political economy and contributed political cartoons to union newsletters. And at the age of 26, he moved to Berkeley, California, and began working as a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. He enrolled in the San Francisco Art Institute, where he earned a BFA in printmaking in 1984, an MA and MFA at the University of California in Berkeley, graduating in 1987. He has exhibited his work nationally and internationally for over 2 decades. And I think the list of exhibitions I'm going to mention are quite recent. A major retrospective organized by the Des Moines Art Center in Iowa in 2007 that traveled to UC Berkeley Art Museum and the Palm Spring Art Museum in 2008 with a fully illustrated bilingual catalog. In fall of 2013, a major survey of his work opened in Central Museum Atrium in Vitoria-Gasteiz near Balboa, Spain. And this is my favorite footnote with a trilingual catalog documenting the exhibition. It traveled to the Canary Islands in 2015, and also at the same time in 2014, he opened a print retrospective at Wayne State University in Detroit and a print survey of etchings and lithographies at the Instituto de Arte Gráficas de Oaxaca in Mexico. Enrique is currently full professor at Stanford University's Department of Art and Art History, and his work can be found in many public collections, including, this is a very long list, Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, among many others. He is the recipient of numerous awards, such as 2 NEA Artist Fellowships, 1 from the National Academy of Arts and Letters in New York, and a Tiffany Fellowship, again, only to mention a few. So, hold on one second there with me. I do want to mention that right now at the museum through December 6th at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art on campus, we have a show of Enrique Chagoya, Adventures of Modernist Cannibals. And June Black wanted me to mention that students have free admission, but we also have museum passes, I think near the doors, that please pick them up and distribute them to your friends for, again, free admission to the museum. It's a really wonderful opportunity to see his work in person. And I would also like to take the time to thank Jordan Schnitzer and his family foundation for making the lecture and exhibition possible. We want to thank and acknowledge the support of the Center for Latino, Latina, and Latin American Studies, who co-sponsored the exhibition and talk, Jill Hart's executive director of the museum, and June Black, where is June? Associate curator for academic programs in the arts of the Americas and Europe, for putting this together and, reaching out. Wendy Hellman, our public programming director for art, who organizes our amazing visiting artist lecture series that takes place throughout the year. I highly recommend that you go to our website and take a look at all the other amazing lectures that are coming up. And please, they're public and free and a really amazing resource in our community. So thank you for joining us tonight. There will be a short Q&A following the lecture. And without further interruption, please join me in welcoming Enrique Chagoya.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm very happy to be here, and I hope you can hear me well. We have sound effects here for the... Okay, so yeah. Great. All right. Very good. Can you hear me well here? All right. So I'm going to go very briefly through different bodies of work I have done because we don't have much time. I'm going to say a little bit about my background growing up in Mexico City, beginning with my parents. They influenced somehow my attitudes and my, how can I say, my general vision of the world. My formative years basically were very much influenced by both of my parents. My mother was a seamstress, and eventually she opened a workshop at home. I used to help her carrying, clothing for her deliveries. And my father was an artist who, this is my mom. My father was an artist who studied graphic design, but he never made a living as an artist. He eventually got a really interesting job at the central bank. The central bank in Mexico, the Banco de Mexico, is the mint. They print money, and they cannot afford to be corrupt. So my dad was working for the internal security of the bank, and his office was a museum of crime. I will explain you how that happened, but anyway, that's my dad. But this is one of the artistic actions of my dad. He hand painted this photo of my mom. He put too much red on the lips, unfortunately, but and that's my dad. Was a scary dad to have, though. By the way, he had a little bit of a short temper, and but he just basically was like a Superman, and he's the one who gave me my very first drawing classes and color theory when I was about 7 years old, because I used to, bug him all the time, asking him to draw animals, to draw things for me until he got tired of me and he just decided to teach me how to do it myself, which was the best thing he did, because since then I never stopped drawing and making cartoons, sometimes of my teachers, getting in trouble at school. I draw my teachers naked when I was in high school. Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into that, but the office of my dad was full of forgeries of money bills of all kinds of denominations: dollars, U.S. pesos, Bolivar, Venezuelan money, basically, Cuban money. And in his, I was just telling to some students not too long ago, in his desk, he had the skull of a very famous criminal in Mexico, the Tiger of Santa Julia. The Tiger of Santa Julia killed a lot of police, a lot of cops in the beginning of the 20th century. He was very feared by the police, and the only way they got him was when he went to the toilet. So it became even more famous after death, because if you call a friend and your friend cannot talk to you on the phone and they call you back, and if your friend tells you, well, you got me like the Tiger of Santa Julia, then you know where your friend was. So it's a national joke. Anyways, the skull of this guy was right in the desk of my dad. By the way, the famous engraver Posada, Jose Guadalupe Posada, who's famous for all this Day of the Dead imagery that everybody uses all the time, he did a skull of the Tiger of Santa Julia at some point. So, but what impressed me the most were the forgeries. And there was a famous case of one French forger whose last name was, a.k.a. San Pietro, was Italian last name. I forget his real French name, but he was known as San Pietro. He did forgeries of dollar bills, French money, that was francs at the time, Moroccan money. In Mexico, he did forgeries of, when he moved to Mexico, he did forgeries of dollar bills, of Mexican pesos. And it took about 10 years to the Mexican police to find him until his girlfriend denounced him. The girlfriend he left behind in France. Big mistake. So she called the Mexican police or wrote to the Mexican police a letter, and they found him and they got him. And my dad began to visit him in jail. And then began to talk to artist in a way. My dad had some pity on him, brought him art supplies. He did a really amazing portrait of my dad. It looks like a black and white photograph. You don't even see brush strokes. And my dad began to ask him in prison, because he had to to ask, do a little bit of criminology research. Asked him why did he do it, because he was a great artist and he went to some of the best schools in France, came from a very wealthy family, he didn't need the money, and the artist said, I just did it for the thrills. And that was it. For the thrills, the guy was 10 more years in jail. Eventually, he went back to France. But that left, and even that story left a big influence on my work, because that's what maybe where I come from, in a way in which I like to do look-alike things. Also, the social context in Mexico back in the 60s, when I was a teenager, the late 60s, were very dramatic. Like everywhere else in the world, 1968 was a very dramatic year with, demonstrations in many places. In Mexico, there was a massacre, October 2nd, right before the Olympic Games, where about 500 people got killed. And I was a teenager at the time, and my mom came very upset from work, actually, from a delivery that she did. She was crying, and it was crying because she saw a police killing an 11-year-old boy in front of her. And so she cried. I cried to her. I didn't understand why that happened. And that set a precedent for me to be curious about what's happening in the world, in society, and trying to understand what happens in the world. And until today, I don't really quite understand. But anyway, so that was the influence of my parents. And I'm going to move on because otherwise, this is my dad. A previous job, he was a firefighter. That's why he was so buff, actually, because they have to train all the time. So here is the one in the front. Anyway, my grandma carrying me, that little fat kid is me. And my sister and my cousin. He's a cardiologist now who lives in Fort Lauderdale, and my sister lives in Texas. Anyways, this is important. I had a nanny who was a Nahua Indian, and the Nahuas are the Aztecs, the former Aztecs, and she used to talk to me in her own language all the time, and unfortunately didn't stick to me. I forgot all of that. But when I grew up, I began to study English. Since I was in kindergarten, they were teaching us English, and I began to talk to her in English because I thought that was her language. And she used to laugh at me when I spoke to her in English. It was just amazing. She was almost like a second mom to me. Anyway, so I'm going to move on because we won't have time. These are my other two sisters, Leticia and Maritza. They live in Mexico City right now. Leticia is a psychologist for children, and Maritza is an interior designer. Anyway, so these are my friends in crime in the university. Believe it or not, this is the way we thought we would be dressed up. We used to look more hippie-like. Then we got very much involved in politics and activism, and we have to dress up like preppies or like, good kids. We stopped talking politics. It was very dangerous. We did not even speak on the phone, nothing. And we used to go to demonstrations or go talk to workers when they were in strikes, things like that. I used to do illustrations for the newspapers. So this is the way we clean up ourselves. Now when I see, I think we just look so suspicious. Anyway, I married an American in Mexico who was a sociologist, Janine. That's my first wife. And that's my sister. This is really funny. These are the times when people used to wear the same dress. I guess they went to the same sale. Anyway, so my sister is carrying a baby, and my cousin and his wife, next to him, and Janine, my ex-wife. We used to live in the countryside for many years, and in the countryside, she got really sick. She got parasites, unfortunately. And that's when we decided to move to the U.S. Also, on the other hand, working in the countryside was becoming really dangerous. I was organizing peasants, farmers, poor farmers, basically, to get loans from private banks. Unfortunately, a lot of the peasants didn't know how to read and write, and the managers were stealing money from them. So I went to the central bank and denounced some of them. I knew the central bank was honest, so I got one of them fired. some guy who got a loan for millions of dollars to different villages to raise cattle and to sell the milk to Nestle company for nothing. And the people in the villages could not even drink the milk. So when he got fired, like a month later, he got hired by Nestle company as the regional manager. And the judges who had to decide about the agrarian legal issues decided that the peasants had to pay the full amount of the loan, nevertheless. And then I began to be having threats. And so all of this coincided with my then wife getting really sick. So I quit my job and we moved to Berkeley. My ex-wife was from the Bay Area, and in Berkeley, I felt like I was in heaven. The sister republic of Berkeley suddenly was a place that was very friendly to me. And the major at the time, Gus Newport, was an African-American major who did Managua, Sister City, and we were doing solidarity with Nicaragua. And eventually, when I went to the San Francisco Art Institute, I met quite a few friends there, but I met Lucy Lippard, who's this art critic from New York. She, at the time, organized an exhibition called Artists Call Against the Intervention in Central America. And that started my political imagery with my own work. I was very active in Berkeley at the time. This is a time when the UC Berkeley Art Department was almost closed by the university, and the students protested. This was in the crisis of 1991, I believe. I was teaching at Berkeley at the time, and some of my students were sitting right behind. So I'm going to move on with my forgeries. The first time I ran into Goya's prints was when I was studying history of printmaking at the San Francisco Art Institute, and I fall in love with these prints. I saw original prints, and as a final paper, we had to do either a print or write a paper, and I didn't want to write a paper, so I decided to try to imitate Goya. So I guess influenced by my dad's office, his Museum of Crime, I decided to see if I was good at forgeries. So I took a measuring tape, I measured the print, I took notes about how long should I leave it in the acid, I worked on the plate, I realized that my lines were too clean. Goya's, this is Francisco Goya's after Disasters of War. Goya's lines were shaky. And I have to shake my hand to make the lines just like Goya. And I realized Goya's hands were most likely shaky. And that was a very amazing discovery I had. I don't know if our historian might ever find out how shaky was Goya's hand when he was drawing these etchings, but I realized it was. And he gave a really beautiful line, by the way. So that's my version of Goya. It's not Photoshop. And I guess you recognize Ronald Reagan. At the time, 1983, this is when I was still a student, Ronald Reagan, I was supporting the Contras, who were this terrorist group who was invading Nicaragua, who wanted to get rid of the Sandinistas. And he declared that the Sandinistas were Marxists and communists working for the USSR, at the time, the Soviet Union. Although, my ex-wife was a religious activist. She worked with a lot of churches. So when we went to Nicaragua, we were working mostly with churches. And the Sandinistas were very much a broad spectrum of political groups. They were not just leftists. They were like very progressive liberals who were not even close to socialists. And they got rid of a dictatorship of the Somoza family that had been there for around 30 years. So they promised elections, and they did. And eventually, actually, they lost the first elections that they did, and they stepped a step of power. And eventually, they won the elections again. But Ronald Reagan at the time was supporting the Contras and against the will of the Congress, because the Congress was against supporting the Contras. So Ronald Reagan declared himself, he vetoed the resolutions from Congress, and he declared himself a Contra. So this etching has the word contra in itself. I didn't change the titles of Goya. So the original title is Contra el bien general, or against the common good. So it was perfect for Ronald Reagan calling himself a contra. Eventually, I did an edition of this not until 2003. So, I mean, this is from 1983, so it took 20 years to do that. So I did other etchings after that series. This is something else that influenced my work. Walt Disney designing a Mickey Mouse gas mask for children in 1942. I don't know if you've ever seen that gas mask. Here it is. You could Google. If you just go to the internet and Google Mickey Mouse gas mask, you will find it. And I don't know if there is in a museum, or I've never seen one myself. It would be a great object to collect, I guess, now. It's kind of scary, but... so I did my version of that print. Great Deeds with the Dead, it's called. And the edition, more clear. Then I did a self-portrait. This is a disclaimer. I did a self-portrait with Goya's shoe, which is too big for my foot in the background, and a hat. And the television set says, "This is not a test." And here I made this imaginary meeting of Goya and Posada, who's the artist I mentioned to you, who did a version of the Tiger of Santa Julia. He did all these Day of the Dead characters. The bourgeois skeleton, the Catrina, was used by Diego Rivera in some of his murals in Mexico City. And here they're just being introduced by death, basically, to each other. Anyway, this one is about the art market. So I'm going to move kind of fast through some of these because I have just way too many, and that will take the rest of my lecture if I stick to this. This is the previous part. I saw this is John Paul II, which was more liberal than the German. What's his name? Benedict. And hopefully the new Pope is a little more progressive. It seems like, but still a politician. And this print was perfect for political popes. He's trying to be good with God and the devil at the same time, just walking the tightrope in the middle. Watch out, because the rope is breaking. So I did a few other Goyas. This is after the Occupy Wall Street movement in New York. Same thing. There was an Occupy Oakland and Occupy San Francisco in the Bay Area, so I could not help myself to do something like this. The original title of this etching is called No se puede mirar, or You cannot even look. It's hard to look with the gas on your face. That's the cup that sprayed the students at UC Davis a few years ago. It's all over the internet if you look for that guy. Then I did a series of etchings after Goya, after the Caprichos. And in the Caprichos, Goya brings light through the darkness of the human spirit in a way. And this is Watch Out, the Boogeyman is coming. So I replaced the Boogeyman for KKK, one of these dragons from the KKK. I guess the tech industry here now. It's Fidel Castro dying. I made this series in 1999. And since then, Castro has been dying since 1999. It's endless death, poor guy. A self-portrait. These are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum. I ran into these prints once. They put them next to each other with Goya, and I was really intimidated by that experience. I don't want to compete with Goya, but anyway, so this one of my favorite prints from all times. The Sleep of Reason produces monsters. Here's a self-portrait of Goya. Goya is asleep, and apparently he's having a nightmare with all these bats and owls and all these symbols of evil. But in contemporary times, these animals are endangered species. I mean, the owls. We love owls. We stop logging to protect the spotted owls. Or the bats are very good for agriculture. In fact, we're very worried about bats being infected by fungus and dying all over the continent. And cats. I have cats. I love cats. They're some of the best pets you could ever have. And so nothing scary about this. So I changed it for really scary flying things, like stealth bombers, Tomahawk missiles, Apache helicopters. I left a little owl, the owls, more like friendly companions more than scary things. This is Jesse Helms and Jerry Falwell. And they were scandalized that, I don't know if you remember the Teletubbies. I used to watch them. And Inky Winky is the purple one, has a purse. And Jerry Falwell said that was too gay and too contaminating for the children's minds, and they shouldn't be on TV. And so I decided to put them here. Unfortunately, it's really hard to see here, but they give a pedicure to Inky Winky too. They cut his little feet though, but they themselves are given a pedicure. And Jesse Helms on the left is the one who single-handedly killed the NEA grants to artists. The NEA grants were amazing support especially for emerging artists. I was lucky to get 2 of those, and they made a difference in my career. A lot of my friends got them too. You didn't need to be nominated. Anybody was able to apply. You submitted 20 slides, as many times as you wanted, and then if you were lucky, if it was regional, you got $5,000, and if it was national, you got $20,000, which in the mid-'80s was a lot of money. So that was ended in 1991. Basically, today there is no NEA grants for artists. It's a really, really sad thing to do, and we very, very much owe it to Jesse Helms. He got scandalized by the Robert Mapplethorpe exhibition of his photography on gay erotic imagery, as well as with the photograph by Andres Serrano, Peace Christ, which was, according to Andres, I talked to him about it, was just a protest against the commercialism of the church, about how materialistic the church has becoming. But of course, conservative politicians distort the reality for their own purposes, and none of that was mentioned. So this is Linda Tripp and Monica Lewinsky. Linda has the word Linda is in the. See, Linda Tripp betrayed Monica when she taped her conversations with her, and then made a lot of publicity about the affair with Clinton. Then these are more recent. These are from 2013. This is Benedict, again, the Pope. So this is about the pedophilia in the church. Mucho hay que chupar. There's a lot to suck. So these are like babies on a basket. And I have an Italian friend who told me that her brother, that everybody in Italy knows that. I don't know if that's true or not, or if it's just a rumor, but that the Pope had a brother who was involved in the pedophilia in the church. And that's one of the reasons why he quit, because the scandal is so, apparently so deep. Even the current Pope hasn't done much. He's beyond just talking. And that he quit because of that. And he's the only Pope who apparently quit before he died. That most popes quit their position when they die. So that was very strange. So, but this is nothing confirmed. But still, it seems like something very, very strange about that decision. This is Obama. I made this. The title, the translation, "No te escaparás," you will not escape. It's Obama just being surrounded by all these powerful interests that pretty much run the state around. There's an author, I forgot his name, there's a book, it's called Deep State, and talks about how corporations, the security agencies, and maybe the White House are the ones who always run the country, and they take decisions no matter what. I mean, Obama could go and bomb, kill people without the permission of Congress. There are decisions that are taken like that, and apparently this is regardless of who is in power, whether Republican or Democrat. So there was an interview with Bill Moyers, which was really fascinating. And the name of the author escapes my memory right now, but Deep State is the name of the book. And if you Google Bill Moyers, you probably could find that program. But so this is in a way about the deep state surrounding Obama. This is a more recent self-portrait with Goya's hat. This is Grande el sombrero. The hat is too big. That was about a year and a half ago. Those dust. This is kind of the trial of the Mexicans, the evil characters. I made it as a rat fink here. I grew up with rat fink, by the way. We have 3D models of rat fink in Mexico. It's this, very similar character to this, but with hot rods, all these cars. And I used to draw in secondary school rat finks, versions of my friends. Actually, they really liked it. But I decided to just put it here. This is like a trial by the Holy Inquisition. Or Thou Who Can't. It's about political parties. What a sacrifice. I guess this is Obama and Wall Street. Don't get me wrong, I like Obama in a lot of things, but once in a while, I don't understand why certain things, like for instance, why they didn't arrest anybody from Wall Street in the last crisis. I mean, my background is in economics, and that was a criminal act, and nobody got. I think one or two people got indicted on lower levels, but that was very disappointing. Anyways, I'm not going to be talking about Wall Street or all these details, but this is another version I did of the Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. And this is a constant anxiety I have that I express in this work. How close are we constantly of nuclear wars, especially with so many countries with nuclear weapons now are in conflict with each other, like Russia, and Israel has a nuclear bomb, India, Pakistan, not to mention China or North Korea, the US, and it's in history we have been very close more than once to either an accident or actual wars. So it's truly Goya lives in contemporary times with these kind of preoccupations. This is Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox News, who lost a contract for spying on the cell phones of famous people in London. So he lost the contract for a satellite, and a big deal for him. It was going to be a big monopoly of telecommunications. Again, about the art market with Damien Hirst painting. Why hide them? And this is Vladimir Putin again. This one, you don't see the stamp. Unfortunately, I didn't have the photograph. I did a rubber stamp of an electric guitar with Pussy Riot on the bottom. So that's. And this is a little portrait of Wall Street, basically, when it went through a financial crisis. This more recent version of the pedophilia. I get in trouble for that, actually. I'm going to talk about it. So I'm going to move on to maybe the codices. Maybe quickly pass through other forgeries I did. This is after George Cruikshank, British cartoonist, engraver from the 1800s. And that's my version of that, the headache. This is a little more sympathetic of Obama. Poor guy. He probably has a hard time. He has devils, red and blue, from the Democratic Party and from the Republican Party. And other devils maybe of his own creation. I don't know. But, I had to make money after the influence of my dad's office. So I made my own version of the dollar bill. It's an electronic version. You could see it online on Magnolia. The numbers keep moving. So on the lower left is the public debt. And in the upper right is how much we owe per household. This was in the year 2009. Today is about, this was $11 trillion. Today is about $18 trillion. So it's really scary. And I put the public debt brought to you by Neo-Econ Economics. And I changed everything in the writing, federal bailout note, the Untitled States of America, one recession, and or signatures. Donald Farnsworth, who was the artist who worked on the electronic part and digital part, and myself. We did a lot of those. We haven't been able to use them though as money. This one is really hard to see. There is a little stereotype of a Mexican bandit in the red. Oh, here it is. That's a detail. These are like my cartooning, editorial cartooning. You know, this is Vasquez and Cubans out of Central America. This is what I did for that exhibition against intervention in Central America that critic Lucy Lippard organized. Was a national initiative. And that was the very first drawing I did with political content. This was in 1984. Unfortunately, it got damaged, so I had to do a forgery of myself. The one on the left was torn in both ends by somebody who didn't like it. And I managed to do very much an exact replica, including with the accidents. So this is another one. This is at the Stanford Museum, the Cantor Art Center. These are very large drawings. These are about these are 80 by 80 inches, so almost 7 by 7 feet. This is at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. I'm going to show you another cartoon or charcoal drawing, but it's influenced by all this religious imagery. This is, it's really hard to see from the back. And this is baby Jesus having an erection and kissing mom. I don't know if this is the origins of the pedophilia in the church or not, but this is a Renaissance painting done by Robert Camping. And it's in the book by Leo Steinberg, The Sexuality of Christ and Modern Oblivion. And the theory is that the artist wanted to represent the humanity of Christ. He was a human being just like anybody else. But also children with erections at the time, or babies, were representing kings. So this was a way to represent a king. So there's nothing satirical or sarcastic about these paintings. But it's something that artists today could not paint. I mean, you will be shot, probably. But this is another Renaissance painting from the same book, The Man of Sorrows by Martin van Heemskerk, a Flemish artist. And the same thing. I used this one in a drawing to protest the closing of the NEA grant back in 1991. Not good for funding. That's what it's called. And this was the first Persian Gulf War back in 1991, Holy Order, which is something I could have done today. And this is sort of my yang and yin of my drawings, is thesis, antithesis. So I'm gonna move on. Finally, gonna get into my. This one is called Roadmap with Alice in Wonderland. More militant religious characters here, but I made it into a tapestry. This one you probably know Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. With Osama bin Laden is the witch here. Tony Blair, the former prime minister in England, is the prince, and Condoleezza Rice. She's back at Stanford, actually, right in the middle. And all the characters from the administration, I didn't want to talk to them. But this is history, it's gone. Thankfully, somebody bought it. This is the word liberty backwards. It's about our dependency on fossil fuels, basically. This is about immigration. When paradise arrived, the middle finger, it's hard to see from far away here, but the middle finger reads English only. So another drawing about immigration issues. Immigration has been so present since 2001, since 9/11, and it keeps giving me subject matter in my work. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking about this, and this is another forgeries I did after Philip Guston. I'm just going to go really quick through them because these are history. In the original drawing of this one, these were after President Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew were the characters of these drawings. In this case, Dick Cheney has a gun. And I made this drawing before he shot his friend. So I did this in the last elections were in 2004, right? I did that right before the elections, and unfortunately they got re-elected. And then he shot his friend a few months later, something like that. Photo opportunity. I only changed the faces, basically. I didn't have to change the word Billy because Billy Graham is the same person who influenced Richard Nixon in his religious beliefs, and Billy Graham influenced George Bush to quit alcoholism, or to quit alcohol, I'm sorry. Not to quit alcoholism will be to go back to drinking. To quit alcohol, and so they were good friends, so I didn't really have to change anything here. And then I did a mix of Richard Nixon and George Bush, Richard Bush. Drawings I have done after Orozco is a Mexican muralist who did figures like this. So this is a tribute I did to Orozco, the happy embrace of the rich and poor. With the Dalai Lama, I don't know if you saw an interview in PBS with the Dalai Lama lately, but he declared himself a Buddhist socialist. So I put marks right next to him too. And this was done like 2 years ago. I didn't know that Dalai Lama will declare himself a socialist Buddhist. Anyway, this was an installation at the new school. So finally, I began to do my codices after learning about the destruction of the books during the conquest of Mexico back in 1521. And there was a large library there in the kingdom of Texcoco. At the peak of the Aztec Empire, a king, Netzahualcoyotl, around the same time as Columbus arrived to the Americas, Netzahualcoyotl built the largest library in the continent. Texcoco was sort of like the Athens of the Aztec Empire. And just to break all the stereotypes about the Aztecs being barbarians with human sacrifices and cannibalism, this king was a poet and an architect who was against human sacrifice. And he developed poetry festivals, developed a concept of God that at the time was very advanced. He said nobody have seen God, therefore nobody knows how he or she looks like. So he built up a pyramid with nothing on top, representing nothing, because nobody have seen God. So he did an empty room. Luckily for him, he died before he met any Spanish conquistadors. When the conquest took place, the first thing they did, some of the Spanish soldiers and priests, was burn all the books. So they piled up all the books from the library of Texcoco, and they burned them in a bonfire, and it was a mass suicide. The indigenous people who witnessed that destruction just jump off cliffs or hang themselves. The Spaniards could not stop the mass suicide. It was a tragedy. A lot of was lost. There's only 3 Mayan books that survived, one in France, the Codex Paris, one in Spain, the Codex Madrid, and one in Germany, the Codex Dresden. There's zero Aztec books, not a single one survived. Pre-Columbian. There are Aztec books that were done immediately after the conquest. And there is about 19 books from the Oaxaca region, from the Mixtec Zapotec area. So altogether about 22 pre-Columbian books. And then hundreds of manuscripts of maps and things like that. But for the most part, it was lost. And, if you think of the Alexandrian library, all the things that were lost in the fires. We know Greek philosophy, thanks to the things that survived the fires from the Alexandrian library, and went through at least a couple of fires, mostly done by religious fanatics. And so, by the same token, this was totally devastated. Same fate happened to the Mayan books. One single priest, Fray Diego de Landa, burned all the Mayan books except for those 3. Maybe a 4th book exists in Mexico City. They are not sure whether it's a fake or not. It's just fragments of a book. But that's a culturicide, basically. So I began to do my versions of those books because from that perspective, these books or written history actually it's an ideological construction more than a science. And I decided as an artist, I have my own right to make my own ideological constructions without pretending they are ideology. In my case, it's just my self-expression. So I did versions of book pages like this, where the soldiers of Columbus are cutting the hands of the Taino Indians in the middle. And then I use a Mexican joke in the front, on the top, these hands. I have to tell you the joke. And please, my apologies for anybody who might feel offended by this. I use only popular culture. This is not my joke. I didn't do it. Mexico is one of the more religious countries in the world, but some of the craziest jokes about Christ or heaven and hell I have ever heard are from Mexico. And this is one of them. The question is why Christ never took a shower? And the answer was because he kept dripping, the shampoo was dripping through the holes in his hands. And that's what is on the top of his head with Johnson & Johnson shampoo that has this little drip that says no more tears. And that's what he's spraying on the bottom. The engraving was done by a Spanish, commissioned by a Spanish fray. Not all the Spaniards were evil. So some of them denounced Columbus. And this was Fray Bartolomeo de las Casas who denounced the Columbus, and he commissioned these engravings. But anyway, I'm gonna just basically round up my ending of my lecture saying that, conflicts happen all the time in history. And it's natural because we are very diverse species. And one of the conflicts I got into lately was in this book where I was protesting the pedophilia of the Catholic Church. It's the misadventures of the romantic cannibals. And I did it because of that, how can I put it, double face that is presented by the institution of the church. In the one hand, they are against same-sex marriage, and in the other hand, they haven't done anything about the pedophilia. So if they are so moralistic, why they keep one and they don't do anything about the other? Same thing, their militancy against birth control and things like that. So, and I grew up Catholic, and so I decided to just do something where, I question all these things through my imagery. It's not illustrational of anything. It's more my own concerns about it. Because I think if the Catholic Church accepted women as priests and a woman pope someday, will be the most popular religion in the world, I think. And if they accept same-sex marriage, and I have many colleagues that are gay or lesbian at school, teachers, students of mine who are gay or lesbian or transgender, collectors, neighbors who I have deep friendships. And for me, it's just a discrimination to have them excluded of any place, not just religious. But anyway, so I did this book, in which I mix colonialism as well as all these other issues. And the way to represent the corruption of something spiritual in the language of the pre-Columbian books is by mixing visual symbolic elements. So in other words, this is not a portrait of Christ, even though it has the face of a version of Christ, but the body is not his. So it's a corruption of the icon. So when people told me, why do you put Jesus like this way? I say, there's no Jesus, that's a collage. And the page that gave heart attacks to a lot of people was this one. And this was in Fox News. And Fox News put a blur in the middle of the legs, as if there was something really happening. Nothing is happening. There is no touching. There is no nudity. There is no sexual organs anywhere. It's provocative, but it's not. It's not graphic. And for me, this is not Jesus. This is just a corruption of something, of a beautiful belief. So, unfortunately, Fox News didn't call me to explain myself. They only called people who were attacking. And the only thing they say in Fox News was, Stanford professor portrays Jesus having oral sex. And I was like, that was never in my mind. It was more, as I say, about the pedophilia, etc. And thankfully, a pastor defended my work. He sent me an email and asked me, his congregation wanted to I'm going to move on to the next slide. He asked me that his congregation, he told me his congregation wanted him to join a picket line. This is a picket line where the book was being exhibited in Loveland in Colorado. And these were religious people protesting the book. And he asked me what to tell his congregation, because his congregation wanted him to join the picket line. So I told him why I did the book, and he agreed with me. And he told me, thank you for your thoughtful explanation. If you ever come to Loveland, it would be an honor to meet you. And I wrote back immediately to him. I say, I wish most Christians were like you, because you really got it. And we became very good friends. He decided not to to join the picket line. And he got in trouble with his own congregation. Some people in his congregation walked away from the congregation, and he got threats. They put his house online. People were inviting them to attack his house. He had to get security. I got a lot of hate mail, on the other hand. It got really scary. In the beginning, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to invite these people to all of my openings. They're going to have a lot of publicity. Because the publicity was big everywhere. But it got really scary. It's the kind of publicity you don't want. And I have to put security too in my house. I have to put a camera. The Stanford police talk to me, my neighbors, etc. Thankfully, about a month later, the Smithsonian have a similar situation. The Smithsonian have an exhibition of art that was done by gay and lesbian artists in history. And there was an artist, David Wojnarowicz, who had a video with ants crawling on a crucifix. And the same organization that boycotted this show in Colorado boycotted the Smithsonian. So all the attention went to a bigger fish. So they forgot about us. And the pastor and I became very good friends. And after a month, he asked me, well, would you do a painting of Jesus for my... This is what happened to that book, by the way. After all the publicity and hate, this lady, a truck driver, drove away from Montana to Colorado with a crowbar, just got in the exhibition and destroyed the book. So she had to drive about 1,000 miles to get offended instead of, turning off the TV or don't even go see the show. But anyway, all of this passed, fortunately, and this pastor asked me, hey, will you do a painting of Jesus for my church? And I wrote back to him. I say, I'm not religious myself, but if your congregation accepts that from me, the devil, not or how people thought of me, but if your congregation accepts it from me, I'll be very happy to do it. And I thought they were not going to accept. But the congregation accepted with a standing ovation. Some people were like crying, and so it was online. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to have to do it. So I did it. I wrote back to him. I said, the only thing is, nobody knows how Jesus looked like in history. Because the first representations, first of all, were line drawings in caves, like 200 after the times he supposedly existed. And then the first portraits were not until a few hundred years later. And if you see the representations of Christ in different cultures, they are very different. Like the Korean looks, very Asian. The Russian is next, Haitian, Native American. The Hungarian with the red hair. There is the Filipino. There is African. This is the Chinese. The Japanese looks like a ukiyo-e print. Mexican, Indian looking, and then the European. So it's all like self-portraits of cultures, basically. And I told him, I'm just not going to do something different. I'm just going to do my own version if that's acceptable. Yes, that would be acceptable. So I did it again. I could not escape. So I did it. This is a Jesus from, it looks very Muslim, from a book in a Persian book from the 1700s. Anyway, so this is my painting I did. And I put this big word love because just to remind Christians that Jesus was about love, not about hate. And he was also a very controversial person himself. That's why he got in trouble and has troubles with the Roman Empire. And but I wrote the word love and sent pictures to them before I sent the painting. And I thought, I hope they don't ask me to erase that word because, I'm making a statement there. And the pastor, Jonathan Wiggins, he told me, that's great because there is a passage in the Bible that says that Jesus looks over humanity with a banner of love. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that. So maybe there is a God. I was guiding my hand. But I was very happy to hear that, and they pay for the shipping. I sent the painting, and then they asked me to go for the opening. Then I really got scared. I didn't want to go there to Colorado in a controversial thing. I mean, in Colorado, people get killed for going to the theater, going to see Batman. That's what happened in that theater, that tragedy. So I thought they're going to shoot him and shoot me, and I don't want to be in the news. But he kept inviting me, and I thought, well, I had to take responsibility for my art. So I went. I went by myself. I didn't bring my wife or the publisher of the print. I didn't want to risk anybody else. And it was beautiful. It was great. Nobody tried to convert me into Christianity. We didn't speak about God or Christ or nothing. They just appreciated the painting. They put it up really high up. They did a reception, no alcohol, but there was a reception. I met their wives, all the other pastors, and I spoke to their congregation. I thanked them for their open-mindedness. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I had in my life. I felt that there was a dialogue. I got out of my art bubble. The pastor got out of his religious bubble, and it was just a beautiful dialogue. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to finish because I think we run out of time. You could see some of my codices in the exhibition. Most of my books don't have a narrative. They maybe have a theme that you might see in the title of the book. But for the most part, it don't have, this is almost like a self-portrait. I got a bike accident a few years ago, and so it's kind of like escaping the KKK and the Border Patrol here. Legal Aliens Guide to Critical Theory. Let me show you my last book. And It's a book of reverse modernism, or reverse anthropology. Let me see, where did I put it? Oh, never mind. I thought I had it more handy. Maybe I put it with my codices at the end. Here it is. This one is, where are you? Oh, here we are. So it's my latest book, and it's the Cannibales daguerrotípicos. And I decided to do a reverse modernist book. Modernism, artists like Picasso and other modernist artists appropriated art from former colonies to develop their own work. People like maybe Henry Moore, who used Aztec sculpture to develop his sculptures, or Frank Lloyd Wright, who used Mayan architecture to develop some of his houses in Los Angeles. So I decided what would happen if the opposite took place. What if a savage, primitive artist decided to use European art, and in this case, daguerreotypes, or old photography. So I cannibalized a lot of this photography, and I put Picasso here with African masks and his wife, Josephine. Here's Frida Kahlo with Picasso's head here. This is one of Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Los Angeles, but I added Aztec, contemporary Mexican monuments that are very kitsch, right on top. This is, you might recognize him as Joseph Beuys, as an Edward Curtis photograph. And this is Frank Lloyd Wright, in this case designing Mexican kitschy monuments. Picasso as an African sculpture on top of an Aztec mask. Jean Cocteau's body, this kind of like a character is Jean Cocteau with a Mayan head. And I used this head here is from Irving Penn, his photographs of people from New Guinea. A Mexican wrestler here in a Piet Mondrian design by Yves Saint Laurent. This is a Henry Moore sculpture with an Aztec head. The original head is in the knee on the other side. We moved it. André Breton, it's surrealist. The surrealists say that the primitive artists were like the childhood of humanity, so I decided to put him there with sort of like children, Mexican revolutionaries. There were these, I guess, dwarfs that somehow had guns from photograph. And here is the head of Jean Cocteau as an African sculpture on the street. And these things are paper mache sculptures that people sell during Easter. They are firecrackers. They represent the Jude, the apostle that betrayed Christ. But they put politician faces now. They put all these things. An Aztec sculpture with another Piet Mondrian. And another photograph by Edward S. Curtis with the iPod ad in the background. And this little guy is from another photographer, Cartier-Bresson. And Luis Buñuel, the filmmaker, surrealist filmmaker with Rose La Vie. It's a portrait of Marcel Duchamp as a Mexican giant revolutionary, in this case, the opposite. And this background is from Frank Lloyd Wright, but I added an Aztec sculpture in the middle. So that's basically it. And I'm sorry I didn't have more time to show you the rest of my work. So I end up with this Cuban raft boat. That's the way Cubans cross the water. Unfortunately, that car was sunk by the Coast Guard, even though some museums were asking for it. Eventually, they made it, the third attempt, but these people should have been hired by GM especially because we're going to need amphibious cars very soon, especially for cities that are on the coast, like San Francisco or New Orleans. Anyways, thank you for listening for so long. Thank you. So I'll be glad to answer any few questions if we have time, unless we have to get out of here. But yes.
Have you thought about using Soviet art?
Film?
Soviet.
Oh, Soviet art. I've used it only once. I don't have the picture here. Yeah, I used to be influenced by constructivism when I live in Mexico. Because I follow a lot of these artists who were like revolutionary artists and actually very good friends with Lenin. And so I used painting. It's a circle and a triangle. It's by Elisinski, or if I don't. So and it's the Red Army against the White Army, kind of. And I did that in a confrontation between Superman and the King Netzahualcoyotl that I was talking about. But I don't think I have the picture here. But that's the only time I have used it. Although the red and black in my charcoal drawings are in a way influenced by constructivism because they use a lot of black and red as well. Although in pre-Columbian mythology, black and red were symbols of knowledge, were symbols of opposites. And there are mythological stories with black and red in Aztec mythology. But that's a long answer. But I really love especially the concept of the constructivism that wanted to unify art and life and render museums unnecessary because art and life will be part of the same thing. That was a very beautiful utopia. I mean, I wish that was possible. But when I was in my teens, that sounded great. Like, yes, we should do that. A world where art and life are the same thing. Maybe like ancient cultures where, a painting, a sculpture, and a building were done by the same artists, like in ancient Egypt, pre-Columbian civilizations, or in the Renaissance, where the same artist was maybe the architect and the painter, and the sculpture of the thing. Maybe someday we'll go back to that. I don't know when, but ideally, art and life should match, rather than having art for the 1%ers and the market and away from life. Maybe that could be a career shift for the emerging artists, how we could make art and life more close to each other. But that comes from the constructivists. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the Campbell soup cans?
Oh, yes. Let me put them, because they're in the exhibition. It's like an appropriation, or I cannibalize Andy Warhol, in a way. I mean, it's a symbolic cannibalism, and I'm going to read the recipe. They come with a recipe, so you should read the recipes in the back of the cans. This is Anthropology with Noodles and Your Favorite Sandwich, a quick and simple meal that's fun to eat. Add a delicious bowl of America's favorite anthropologies with noodle soup with lots of yummy noodles to your favorite sandwich. Eating anthropologies is so much fun, you are sure to smile. And that's it, like all of the different kinds. So they started with a print. I did a print. And eventually I decided to make the three-dimensional version of the print. So it was my reverse anthropology. In this case, I use Andy Warhol, which I love. I mean, I love Andy Warhol. And I'm not being different than Picasso that way, because Picasso loved African sculpture too, and he did what he did. So I love Andy Warhol and I do this thing. So it's the word cannibalism in my work, and that's why the cans, instead of Campbell's, they say cannibals. It's a commentary on how cultures cannibalize on each other all the time, symbolically. It's not graphic, but In the constant conflicts and wars, that's what happens all the time. But in this case, I decided to make something somehow with humor. But yes, back there.
Could you also talk about in the exhibition, the drawings with the mapping, and if you have I see some affinities there with Miguel Covarrubias, and if you have any affinities with this work.
I like Covarrubias, but no, not much. In case of the mapping, it's more about pollution, and the bigger the country, it means it's polluting more. That country has very little, and those are bigger. But I am fascinated with the language of mapping because it's a non-verbal language. It's non-phonetic, which is similar to the pre-Columbian books. The pre-Columbian books have a non-phonetic language. And people respond to those. I mean, like in the book I show, I mean, it's a non-phonetic version. People get... somebody interpreted the wrong way, though, I have to say, with asking my version. But I like the fact that maps are one of those non-phonetic languages, just like musical language or mathematical languages. Just like musical language, a musician could play Mozart, no matter if that musician speaks English, Chinese, or Spanish. You just read music, and it goes across languages. And visually speaking, we have that kind of connection. A lot of my books and work deal with conflict. And I hope to create a little bit of a bridge between opposite versions. For me, it's natural that humanity has conflicts. As I mentioned in my radio interview, I don't know if it was broadcasted, but humanity naturally lives in conflict all the time because we're very diverse. We're a very diverse species. We have not only different nations, but we have different ethnicities. We have differences of gender, of social classes, of gender identities. We have differences of religions. You name it. We are very different. And it's natural that we're going to get in conflict because of that. And today even more because the world got smaller with so much communication. And what happens is that conflicts happen all the time. And now we have two ways of resolving the conflict: by negotiating and peacefully. And then we move on and we have progress. Or it gets violence, and violence only delays the resolution of conflict. Unfortunately, I mean, you could see the Middle East. I mean, the more violent it gets, the more it's going to take to resolve their conflicts. It's very sad and tragic. But in history, we learned that progress comes from the resolution of conflict. And I am hopeful for that future that will happen because we have to do it. And that's our challenge, to move on as a species. Otherwise, we're going to join the extinct species because we're in conflict with the planet. And we need to resolve that conflict. We cannot go into war with the planet. The planet is going to win. We are nothing. Nature is our boss, and we need to respect nature. And Mother Nature is not going to toy with us. I mean, it's going to be serious. So I think we need to look for things that are very more understanding, more open. And realize actually the differences among people are a commonwealth. The differences enrich our lives. And we should celebrate differences instead of being afraid of each other. It's just to enjoy the difference. The more cultural diversity we have, the richer human beings we are. And living in different countries, I live in Mexico, in Europe, and the US, made me realize that in spite of all of our difference, we are the same species. We have the same feelings of love and hate and what else? I mean, like all kinds of feelings of good and evil, anxieties, celebrations, happiness, all of that we share. And eventually the best and the worst is part of us, all of us. and hopefully more of the best than the worst. And I think art is not going to resolve the problems, but it's just a bridge, a dialogue. In the best cases, a dialogue like what happened to me with this religious community, which thankfully ended up in a happy end story. And that's what I like about nonverbal languages. Very long explanation of non-language. Maybe the last question? Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how being a teacher or working with students influences your artwork?
It reminds me of not repeating myself. So, because it's very fresh to see new minds all the time, very fresh and questioning everything. And I learn as a teacher from my students. So they say that whoever teaches learns twice, and it's totally true. So I love my students. Teaching is the most relaxing part of my career. Actually, faculty meetings, being in charge of a hire or it's hard work and or deadlines for exhibitions. My career, whatever it is that could get you sick. But teaching is where I have a beautiful interaction with young people. And I keep learning from them. Sometimes I even learn techniques from them, like transfers. I learned them from my students many years ago. One of my favorite experiences, I'm going to end up with this, was I used to teach, before I teach at Stanford, I was teaching at Cal State University in Hayward. And it was more like a community college where I have students from all ages. I have my oldest students were 80 years old. There was another one 70 years old. And then my youngest students were like 19, 18 years old, all in the same class, all ethnic groups. And one of my favorite students, I was teaching etching. Eva was a survivor of a concentration camp. And Eva did these beautiful dancing figures in color. And in our critique, I asked Eva, what is this drawing so beautiful? She said, I asked her, are they dancers or what are they doing? No, these are people in a concentration camp. And I thought, wow, I didn't think that. You don't want to be more clear about it? Why don't you put some barbed wires? And I gave her examples of like people like Leon Golub, who painted people tortured in El Salvador in giant paintings. And I have shown her like Suko, who is this artist who does all kinds of work. She did a series on South Africa and animal abuse, etc. And Eva told me, no, I don't want to do that. And I say, why? No, because I never want to see it again. And that hit me like I apologized to her, because then I realized that if you don't live through a trauma, you are privileged. You could do anything with your imagery. But if you live a trauma, you don't want to see it again. You want to stay away from that trauma. You might want to forget about it. But she was not forgetting about it. She just was translating it into the still painful but beautiful. And that's maybe one of the biggest lessons I got from my students. How privileged we are when we could do any kind of imagery versus somebody who has to be very tactful about how you do your imagery. And that happens to artists who live in countries where there is not much freedom of expression. They have to find ways in which they are very subtle, like Iranian artists. Some Iranian artists have to hide. For instance, some gay Iranian artists have to be very subtle about it. There was a point when I remember it was a woman artist who was criticized by the Iranian government. I forget what she did. They told her she should be painting flowers. And then the protest of the artists was everybody did flowers. And there were flowers all over the city, and the government didn't get it. But that's how subtle it was and how smart they were. So big lesson for me on that from my student. I don't know if she's still alive. This was back in the early 90s when I was teaching at Cal State Hayward. That's a long answer for your question, but very good question. Thank you, everybody. So, thanks for being here. Thank you.